What is absolutely critical is your relationship with money. So changing the country doesn't mean you have to enter politics. You can do a lot more, many more things to make that happen. Peninsular India contributes to 50% of India's GDP, which is 25% of the population. The one constant in education is going to be technology. Quality talent that we have in this country literally knows no bound. Just because you qualified in a degree, it doesn't make you that person. You can go learn a completely new skill set, and that's perfectly okay. What actually stops you is not, weirdly what stops you is your idea of pedigree. And you need to stop hanging on to your degree as if that defines you. It doesn't.
In case there are some of us here who want to start a company, how should they be going about preparing their first version?
Okay, so
Divya, so I know that Adhiraj did some introduction. I'll maybe talk about our relationship, which is Lightrock has probably been one of the investors for us, which has been the most long-term thinking. When it comes even today to think about like what should our next 5 years, 10 years looks like. I mean, that's Divya is the person that I go to. And I mean, the focus of the fund has been impact. And please elaborate on that like once I'm done, which actually helps because what we're trying to do here is create impact and transform talent. But Divya, I would stop speaking. Please, if you could also introduce yourself and the fund, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Very privileged to see all of you, especially given that you're the first cohort. I think Adhiraj mentioned I started off my professional career as a lawyer. I graduated from National Law School in Bangalore. I worked in the UK for about 5 years, mostly during the time that the credit crisis had happened in 2008. And 5 years of working in derivatives sort of made me realize what I did not want to do after with my life. So I decided to come back for a bunch of personal reasons. Family is all obviously here. And in that journey, I discovered that I wanted to be part of reimagining what education should be like. I come from a family environment where we are today is my parents still can't digest it in terms of how much we have achieved, my sibling and I. And I use that as an opportunity to say, okay, this is going to be the purpose of my life. So let me try and figure out what are the scalable, sustainable, and new ways of thinking what education should look like, right? Because education, like healthcare, has multiple stakeholders. And usually the users are not payers. So complex design models. And then to really scale this requires phenomenal founders doing some very, very cool things. And that is what is going to move the needle in education. And that's kind of been my personal view, which is why I worked with 2 sets of founders over 8 years before I came into the investing background. My profile may say human capital. I did everything and anything that came my way. When I worked in those 2 companies over an 8-year period, the goal was to essentially figure out what are some of the smart business models that will actually scale and that will make commercial capital, but also fundamentally help millions and millions of students to learn, right? Especially in the K-12 space. So spent a bunch of years there, joined investing again through serendipity and weak connections, as they would say in MBA. But and one of the things that sort of brought me to Lightrock was that Lightrock's view on Lightrock and the team there at Lightrock, the India team at Lightrock, they've been doing investing now for 15 years in the impact space, right? And for most people, purpose and capital don't really mix, right? Because that's not what we've seen on movies. That's not really how the playbook runs. But what we are trying to say is that, look, the narrative of the West doesn't have to work for us. Everything is not about disruption. If you had to really build something for 30 years, 40 years, you have to think about incentives of all of the stakeholders who are coming to you in relation to when you're trying to run a business. So when you have to think about all of those stakeholders, you are automatically thinking impact. You don't need an SDG certification to say that you're thinking of impact, but you're already, when you are thinking about incentive alignment across multiple stakeholders, you are actually engaging in impact. Therefore, how can we fund those phenomenal founders who are trying to solve very hard problems? The minute you identify those kinds of founders, you will make money. So that's broadly the logic of how we approach impact investing. And I've sort of cut short many, we published a bunch of things online, should feel free to check it up, but sort of summarized a lot of that into how we think about impact investing. And that's kind of, I've now been at Lightrock for almost 4 years. Scalar continues to be one of our flagship investments. We are extremely proud of what the team has managed to achieve. And we keep my conversation with Anshuman as sometimes is always futuristic to the point where sometimes it's not practical at all. But I think that's what keeps us going. I think it's important to ask ourselves, how are we going to fundamentally reimagine something? And then before you know it, it becomes how things are done. And I think that is what transformation means. Transformation means it doesn't actually look very different from what people's expectations are, but you have single-handedly managed to change people's expectations. And we are experiencing it, right? I think even the way technology has been built out of India over the last 15 years, and how all of you have potentially grown up in very different environments where you're more digitally native. The way you think is very different from how your families potentially think or used to a couple of generations ago. So that's sort of coming back to the point. That's been my journey. That's how we think about impact investing. We are very proud of Scalar, and we can't wait to continue supporting them.
Oh, thank you, Divya. By the way, just to elaborate on what Divya was saying, one of the key roles for, I think, Lightrock has been to push us to think really long term and think very, very high impact. For example, as a normal company, we would have said, okay, fine, we'll grow like 10%, 20%, 30% year over year. We'll reach this particular stage. One of the push has been, hey, look, if India is going to become such a large economy, then how do you envision becoming, let's say, an operating system for education or becoming a platform for education where the play becomes really big? And when you start thinking in those directions, then you start coming up with more initiatives, more approaches, which eventually creates a better, bigger company, right? So thank you for continuing to push us. Divya, I'll move on to maybe more specific questions now. Because you've been leading investment in education and skilling at Lightrock. One of my questions would be that if we look at education sector, how do you envision the role of education evolving in the coming years, especially with whatever is happening with AI and machine learning and Gen AI?
I'm very excited about AI, right? But I have a slightly contrarian view in that the power of any new technology, and even if it's a new way of doing, AI used to be called something else 10 years ago, right? And then it became AI today because of the transform models that Google figured out and published upon, right? And there's been a ton of money behind it. I think what is super interesting is what is the macro event that's been happening over the last 30 years in education? The continuous embedding of technology in learning, okay? The hardest thing in education is feedback loops. So if you speak to a lot of older traditional businesses in India, they will say, "Ab karoge tabhi pata chalega," right? Why do they say that? Because when you do something, your feedback loops are shorter, right? You're getting immediate feedback on whether something is working, not working. And that is why I believe you guys went on a sales trip yesterday where you had to go and sell your own inventory, right? You would have learned so much from that one experience that an entire book is not going to replace, right? So immersive feedback loops is at the heart of any kind of learning. Whether you're learning as a 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 40-year-old, 60-year-old, doesn't matter, right? And what are you taking away from that learning experience? What are the signals that you're absorbing? How are you rethinking your original assumptions? That is when learning happens, and that is where your neurons are getting fired in the brain, right? I think the larger macro trend has always been true. It's a universal truth that as we continue to build newer and newer forms of technology, better and better versions of those will get embedded in technology. I think the first phase where YouTube sort of came upon and became such a successful large outcome is where exposure was unlocked. You could get exposed to multiple things that were previously very expensive. It's not impossible, but very expensive. You needed to either go to a big city or talk to very rich people or go to people who have access to those networks. What YouTube did was unlock access and unlock exposure. The next stage typically is how do you use that exposure to actively relearn how you learn inside a classroom, right? And I think what AI does is that fundamentally transforms the speed of that, because that's actually a very difficult process. And that is why we have offline campuses today. We continue to have offline campuses, right? Because it all goes back to how the brain is wired. It has nothing to do with the magic that may happen through a new technology, right? Ultimately, it is about how our brains are wired and how we learn. So I think in that sense, I am very excited about AI because it is becoming hopefully cheaper and cheaper to embed learning and reimagine learning by embedding more and more of technology into that learning process to reduce the feedback loops. And the minute you reduce feedback loops, magic happens, right? Which is why continuous assessment, generally if you look at education itself, right, it's been moving towards continuous assessment, experimentation, learning by doing, exactly what happens typically in a new role or a new job, right? So I think that to me is very, very exciting. Otherwise, I'm always a little bit skeptical on the speed with which things change. It always usually takes longer in the short term, but it happens much faster in the longer term. So that's the irony of how these things work. 10 years from now, it'll look very different. But as of now, the pace at which people are putting money into those business models, I'm a little wary in terms of how quickly they will transform. But capital coming in is very important. The minute capital gets invested in some of these experimental models, that is when you discover what works and what doesn't work. So it's a very important part of the learning process and the maturity of that ecosystem. So super excited. And which is why I think one of the things that got us very excited about Scalar is the one constant in education is going to be technology. So everything that is anchored around technology will succeed. It's just a matter of time. And obviously a good team and, fantastic students, but all of that will come. The most very important design criteria for this is that it has to be anchored around technology, which is where we see the jobs itself will transform over a period of time. Right. So,
well, thank you, Divya. Actually, one of the other questions that we also have is, all of us here are students. And then I very briefly talked about how India's economy is going to grow multifold. What role do you believe that students in India can play in contributing to the growth and dynamism of the startup ecosystem? And how can they best prepare themselves to make a meaningful impact?
So this is, again, another topic that's very close to our heart as an investor. And we've talked a lot about it with Anshuman and Abhimanyu as well, which is India needs more entrepreneurs. We need more business people. Let's not call it entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship has a European connotation. India, I think the amount of quality talent that we have in this country literally knows no bounds. There is no other country in the world which in 10 years' time will have as many engineers or other kinds of graduates or business people like India would, right? I think the most critical thing, but building a business in India is also very hard, right? So I would say if there is one thing that we are also trying to do in our association with Scalar is how can we become the center for entrepreneurship in some ways in the country. Not like a traditional education system, because in a lot of those cases it becomes like a incubation hub and that's it. And you build a little center inside the university campus and people will probably come once a year or something and people publish a bunch of papers and that's it, that they're done. No, but what we want to see is how can Scalar become the largest hub of new businesses in this country? How none of those businesses should be discovered by a VC. They should actually be happening here. Because the best way to, if you want to ask yourself, what is the one thing that I can do to impact the country? Build large businesses, build successful businesses which make money, build businesses which will automatically then completely change the ecosystem around which they're built. You don't have to necessarily employ millions of people yourself. But the minute you build a successful business, that has a systemic impact on the communities where you are starting those businesses. And you will fundamentally become the catalyst behind why other people's lives are changing. And honestly, for very selfish reasons, if you want to fundamentally transform your intergenerational wealth, the best way to do that is to build a successful business. It automatically catapults you to 4 generations in 1 generation. That's the kind of multiplier effect it has. So for very good personal reasons and also for societal reasons, successful businesses are the way to go for this country, especially because I think it's very important for us to become a very successful economy in 50 years. Not just that it is inevitable. Something being inevitable is great, but if you put intention behind it, I think the kind of outcomes that you will receive is just going to be phenomenal. And a lot of the barriers to entry of businesses have been chipped away. It's taken a little longer. I think I would wish if it happened faster, sooner, but some of that is not indirectly in our control. We'll have to influence other stakeholders to make that happen. But building large, successful businesses is the way to go. You can, even whether it is consumer service, it doesn't have to be only in crypto or blockchain. You build good, high-quality consumer businesses in the country. You're changing the ecosystem around you. You build good financial services businesses in the country. You help people think about money differently. You're changing the country, right? So changing the country doesn't mean you have to enter politics. You can do a lot more, many more things to make that happen.
I think it's just adding to that, right? The biggest advantage of being in India, and I compare my experience working in US, Europe, and India. The biggest advantage of being here is that you have access to high quality talent and talent that is not so expensive. And that becomes the biggest unblocker for creating business value, right? So the moment you start thinking about how do I create value, then this is probably the best place to build value. And you can build for the world from here. Like there's so many things that don't require you to be present physically in that particular nation to be creating a product for that nation. And I think that's going to be the key factor for the growth for the country as well. Like we're not going to become 5x because we'll start producing 5x amount of crops. But we're going to become 5x because we have probably the largest youth population in the world and like the biggest aspirational set of youth population in the world. So be the game changer if you're able to.
And if I can just add one more thing to it, I think what the recent developments in our public tech infrastructure, DPI as they call it, right, digital public infrastructure, what it has done, it has fundamentally reduced the transaction costs of setting up a business, right? So, what does that mean? That means it's become a little easier to run your own business. So I think, and therefore, these are all things that are happening in a moment of time that is unparalleled. We call it the promise of generation. So that is our fundamental thesis. If you know, a lot of investors will have these thesis-driven approaches to investing, saying, what is your take on the world? Let's back an idea after that. Our larger thesis is that we are going to back the promise of a new generation of business people and entrepreneurs. And related to this point is, I think what is very useful to keep in mind in that is that, look, you don't have to do this right away also. Look, you can always come back to it. It's always useful if you feel that I need to go somewhere else, pick up a bunch of things and then do it. That's perfectly fine. The beauty of entrepreneurship is that you can pick it up at any point in time in your life. And there you will see multiple people having views on, do you need to do it starting young or old or whatever? But regardless of that, the point is the kind of catalytic impact that you can have on your own family as well as your own ecosystem and community by unlocking a successful business is unparalleled.
Are you just in continuation of that, Divya? Imagine if there are people thinking of starting a business. What emerging markets or regions in India do you believe hold the most promise for future investment, and why?
So here it's building for the world has always been a great strategy for us. Okay, we are in a class of one when it comes to tech services, tech. I don't think that's going to change, because in these things, what ends up happening is when you become so large that you're producing 4% of the world's tech services, then that kind of a seat is very difficult. That if you're in that kind of a position, is very different for anybody else to catch up with you. So I think as a country, we will always be great at exporting services, and that is something that no matter how it looks, right? And that is something that I encourage all of you to, if you're trying to explore entrepreneurship journeys for yourself, it's a wonderful option to consider. The other things that matter when you're trying to set up these kind of businesses, which part of the country should you be in, right? Now, for better or for worse, Peninsular India has completely taken over India's GDP. Peninsular India contributes to 50% of India's GDP with just 25% of the population. What ends up happening when something like this happens is, not to say that you should not build a business somewhere else. You need to these are all complex systems of talent, network and capital, okay? Even for that matter, why Scalar had moved to Bangalore. Around the time we invested, Scalar moved from Pune, right, to Bangalore. Complex systems of talent and capital are very hard to replicate. So you should use it to your advantage. And the best way to use it to your advantage is to be physically placed in locations where capital and talent are in abundance. And I would say for a bunch of reasons that are nothing to do with, who we are as people, Peninsular India has grown in a very different way. It helps to have a coast. It helps to have a certain kind of history. And there is just a lot of money here. And there are also a lot of the richer Indians, the new generation of richer Indians who are sort of investing in their own vehicles, family offices, vehicles, etc. All of that has just completely accelerated in the last 10, 15 years. So I would encourage you to consider that geography matters. You need all the luck and serendipity to work in your favor. The best way to open doors of serendipity is to be placed in the right place at the right time. So you're definitely in the right time, for sure. So now just a matter of figuring out which are the domains that you want to go after and also where you want to be based out of. Yes, the world is more remote. But I think some parts of capital and talent will always be physical because we have not become AI. We are just interacting with AI. So I think to that extent, it helps to be based if you want to build out of Silicon Valley, not a bad idea, of course. But those are also, as Anshuman said, very expensive places to build businesses from, right? So you don't want the labor arbitrage. The labor arbitrage is extremely important. when you're thinking about how every rupee that you're spending, where is it going?
Maybe in continuation again, just in case there are some of us here who want to start a company or start a business, what advice would you give to them, or like what are the things they should be looking out for? How should they be going about preparing their first version? Who should they pitch to?
Okay, so you should use all of us as guinea pigs to start off, right? In the sense, we are here to help you. So we will always be happy. And I think we've started, some of those initiatives even Scale has started, right? Yeah. We are running a challenge and whatnot.
We, by the way, also plan to have one person from at least one VC firm every month here, just in case there are some of you who are trying out new ideas. They can work with you to polish your ideas.
Yeah. I think, look, that ecosystem is maturing in India a lot. Very interestingly, within Scaler, all of us, outside of Scaler also, there are a lot of seed stage investors who might be interested in your ideas that you should potentially explore, right? The other thing to keep in mind is, leaving aside whom you should talk to, see, the networks you'll be able to unlock. It's not that hard. There is a lot of hungry capital that is sitting out there which wants to meet bright students who want to build for the country or for the world, right? I think it's more important to have a good set of values around capital. Okay, capital can be very distracting. You need to know going in why you're raising, how much do you really need to raise, and who is the right partner to have across the table. Those decisions are far more important than actually whether you'll be able to unlock capital. If you do 100 pitches, you'll unlock at least one. I'm reasonably confident of that. It's just a volume game at some level, right? But what is at the core of it is, what is your idea? Why do you think this idea requires a particular type of capital? Who are the right people to therefore partner with? How much do you really want to raise? And when do you want to raise? Those are the big questions where you should absolutely use us to brainstorm with us. Because I have seen, the last 5 years, I'm sure you guys have read the news, seen what's happening in the ecosystem. There have been many ups and downs for different types of founders, right? And a lot of that very interestingly comes down to how much money did they raise? Why did they really need that money, right? In a capital-starved country like India, India needs like trillions of dollars. I can tell you that right away. Not just billions, for us to really unlock our potential in terms of investing in investments, businesses, etc., right? The biggest challenge has been that you get sometimes carried away. Raising the capital is not the game here. Building a successful business at the end of it is the game. And I think if you get carried away by the raising the capital business, that's a vicious cycle. It will look very rich and very plush for a brief period of time. But over a period of time, if the capital doesn't serve your idea, everything is in the service of your idea or the problem that you want to solve. Okay, everything needs to be in service of that. So if everything is not in service of that, that is the risk that I think if you can try and avoid, please do. If you're going through one of those mistakes, experience it as a good mistake to learn and move on. But don't beat yourself about it as well. But it's super, super critical to keep that in mind. In terms of avenues, types of capital, the market is significantly more mature than what it was even 15 years ago. A lot of the credit to that goes to the Flipkart acquisition, which completely changed the game in terms of the quality of talent coming in, the quality of capital coming in. And a lot of the early VCs who are now well-established brands in the country, they've done some really good work there to build that ecosystem out. There is seed stage, there is, kind of setups where you can go find a co-founder. Potentially, we will set up a bunch of things like that ourselves. So there are a lot of avenues. I don't think you should worry about avenues. What is absolutely critical is your relationship with money. That's a very personal relationship. It depends on your values. You have to figure that out. You might even think you are a particular kind of person. You will discover in your journey that you're not. And that's okay. More important is for you to learn from that and move on.
Now I'll actually shift the focus from investing and...
But actually, I want to say one more thing before we move to that.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that got us really excited about Scaler is because Abhimanyu and Anshuman have a very clear idea of what money means to them. Okay. They got better offers than ours on the table when we did our first transaction. Okay. Clearly better offers because the market was just like people would get calls and just getting random offers thrown at you, right? Without any diligence being done. Because there's just too much money sitting in everybody else's bank account that they had to pass through into investment, right? But they were very, very careful and mindful about how to make that decision. What is the process behind it? So there was no automatic happiness associated with the fact that somebody is validating your idea. See, validation is a very powerful psychological tool. The minute you have somebody validating your idea, you feel pride and you feel a sense of accomplishment. But that can be very distracting. So that if there is anything that I would suggest, you have some fantastic people within Scaler who can help you work through that, because it's a very tricky piece to figure out.
Thank you. Divya. I'll shift the focus away from investing a little bit. I think a little bit about your career itself. You've had a very impressive career. So who or what has been the biggest source of inspiration throughout your career, and how has it influenced your approach to work?
So family, etc. is a usual answer. I'm not, I totally would support that. I think I am who I am because of many people who have influenced me. But very interestingly, the founders that I have worked with in my 8-year period, this is before I got into investing, have had a transformative impact on me as a person. See, typically when you in your professional career, there aren't too many transformative events because things get into a pattern. Things become a habit. You wake up, you go to your job, you get a promotion, you become more senior, you become a leader. That's usually what a lot of the people go through. It's not a bad thing, but what ends up happening in some of those situations is you need deep moments of transformation or crisis, sort of wake up inside of you who you are as a person. Okay. And those don't happen very often. They happen, they sometimes happen when you're joining undergrad, because the first time you're away from your family. It's a it's a big transformative experience for everyone. Or they might happen at postgrad for some people, right? So there are always these moments of time which are transformative moments. For me, the most transformative moments outside of the usual pattern, which is immediate family, undergrad, etc., have been the founders. I think the amount that I've learned from my first founder is just unimaginable. How do you say no to somebody? Okay, very simple skill. You think it's simple, but it's not. How do you push the needle on negotiation? Especially if it's not a natural skill for you. It's not a natural skill for me. You can check with Anshuman. I'll say yes to everything he wants. And then I have to go back and
Not true.
and then I have to go back and claw back, right? It's not a natural skill for me. But the best thing that a founder taught me is, look, पूछने में क्या है? बस पूछो. Max to max, you hear a no, right? So what? The no doesn't mean the person is rejecting you. They're rejecting your idea, and that's okay, right? So I remember that as something that I keep coming back to, because even we are all growing, right, as professionals. It's not like just because we are into investing, life is set, everything is done. Things happen. Things are happening inside your companies. You need to raise your own capital. We are also going through our own journey of entrepreneurship, right, as a fund. And in all of this, there are some universal principles that apply. And one of the universal principles, you have to keep pushing the boundary. If it's a comfortable answer, I can give it to you as a guarantee it's going to come back to bite you later. Okay? Especially if you're building something yourself. So you need to ask yourself, what is the best answer? How close can I get? And this goes back to the whole first principles thinking, right? Which is, what is a constraint versus what is the right answer? Sometimes people confuse the two. Saying, nahi ho sakta, to nahi karenge. That's not the right approach, right? You have to ask yourself, why is something not happening? And then what can you do to change that constraint or remove that constraint, right? And those are the things that come when you go through such transformative experiences, because these are the things sometimes that you actually learn by watching somebody do, because it requires a lot of courage. And everybody doesn't have to be born with courage. It's okay. You can pick it up along the way. And I think a lot of this, I picked it up along the way by watching our founders operate in very difficult situations, in very complex business models, and just making sure that we don't go kaput, right? Not even like, and very interestingly, both of the companies that I worked with today are doing very well for themselves. But it was those very important transformative turnaround moments where you discover the DNA of the company and you discover what is it that will move the needle to uncover something. And I remember the second set of founders that I worked with for 5 years who are doing some phenomenally transformative work in K-12 education, the hardest space to work in, right? Very difficult to crack, both from a commercial perspective as well as from an outcomes perspective. But today they serve the public schools of at least 6 countries in Africa, right? And they're profitable as well. So it's not just that I'm doing it out of charity. They're actually a profitable, well-run company. And one of the key things that I learned from them is that just because you qualified in a degree, it doesn't make you that person. You can go learn a completely new skill set, and that's perfectly okay. What actually stops you is not, weirdly what stops you is your idea of pedigree, okay? And you need to stop hanging on to your degree as if that defines you. It doesn't. Because by the time you're through with that process, you discover that you've become 100x of what you originally thought you were capable of. So I think just believing in yourself, being confident. And one of the founders was also a woman founder, and I think it helped a lot. Because when you also grow up in slightly restrictive societies, it helps to see somebody who's broken the rules, to learn from them and say, you know what, even I can do this. You don't have to be born a superwoman and say, I know from day one that I know I can do it, right? And I think a lot of this, she was the one who taught me, saying, the more you think that you can only do this, the more you're black boxing yourself. You're actually being lazy. It's not even that, you're seeing yourself as a victim of the circumstance, and you cannot see yourself like that. And the only way to push the needle there is to go learn that. It's not so hard. It's not, as long as doesn't require a PhD. It's not hard. You can figure it out. It just means you need more time, and you will make a few mistakes in that process. And what is more important is that you find somebody who backs you when you're making those mistakes, right? So I think those two pieces of learning have helped me traverse multiple completely different industries and professions, and I'm extremely grateful to my founders. Yeah.
Divya, actually yesterday when we were doing the commencement address, we played a video where we showed that all champions, they fall, but they're very good at getting back up and then getting back in the game. In fact, there was a video where there was a 400-meter race. The person who was running, she fell and yet got up and won the race. I think that's true for our careers as well, right? Like all of us hit lows in our careers, and if we have not yet, we will hit a low in our career. That is the most certain thing. I think people who do really well, they get back from that and are able to recover from it really well, right? Now it's easy to say that. I think it's easier to actually make it more real and then maybe elaborate that through example. So my question to you, have you had any form of a career low or a crisis that maybe you went through one of your portfolio companies, and how were you able to recover from that? I think some of those examples make it more real for the students here.
Oh goodness, so many. I seriously, so many. Sometimes I think my professional journey has been a series of failures with a few silver linings in between, right? And in a good way. So almost all the companies that I have worked as an employee or working with the founders, they've all gone through payroll crisis, no money to pay salaries. And I was in charge of, in many of those companies, the human capital function. So I had to pick up the phone and talk to a bunch of employees and tell them, look, it's going to come, but it's not going to come on time. And I'm sorry we are in this position, but we're doing our best. Now, I think so that is one example. I was in another company. I was part of a team where there was a fraud that was discovered, a large fraud, right? And I was investigated. When I was on my maternity leave, I was investigated. I didn't even, thankfully it all worked out well, but these are all, third example is just realizing that you have been a terrible leader for your own team. I think that has been the one that has hurt me the most, emotionally and psychologically as well, where when I became a leader or I was put in charge of a team, I had zero experience. As a lawyer, what you're very good at is being an individual contributor. Okay, you're good at, the prize is given to the person who becomes the best individual contributor or who's able to bring in the best sales, best business development. Those are the two prizes available in any law firm. And those are the two types of people who become partners at law firms. Okay, I had always been an individual contributor. Okay, and I had never actually exercised even my brain muscles at being an empathetic leader. So discovering within the first 8 months of being put in charge of a team, the 101 mistakes I was making when managing my team. I think each of these moments were very, very low lows. Like you come out of it thinking you will never recover. There are these dark moments you feel like, okay, what are you doing with your life? Okay. There are moments when you feel like the hindsight bias just kills you. It really wants to kill you. You want to go back and say, can I just erase everything that went wrong? And can I do the whole thing differently? Right? I think there will be many such moments. And as Anshuman put it very beautifully, I think what matters is how do you react to that? And the best word that describes the reaction to me, which again I learned from watching other people, right, is grace. You need to come out of it realizing that the world is not about you. It's okay. People make mistakes. You have to find a way to forgive yourself first, because otherwise you will not be in a position to get up and run that race again. Okay. And I don't think that comes easily to most of us. Most of us have grown up in family environments where we've struggled, where the idea is to not forgive yourself, because forgiving yourself is almost seen as being lazy, right? So how do you sort of give yourself just a little bit of a space? You don't require too much. You need one day. You need a good night's sleep. It's not much, right? But you need those brief moments where you come out of it saying, I messed this up. I need to show up tomorrow and fix this. And I think that is very, very critical. And weirdly, the skills are emotional regulation. It is not how smart you are, what your IQ is, or what is your JE rank in all of this. None of that really matters. right? Which is why a lot of successful business people come from very diverse backgrounds. A lot of it comes down to how you manage yourself emotionally and how you help your team work through those problems and mistakes. I can definitely put my hand on my heart and say, I haven't necessarily come out of all of this in great glory, but I've used it as an opportunity to learn. And some of this also you see from watching others, right? As founders of businesses, you make lots and lots of mistakes. You make them every day. But if you sat and crucified yourself on your mistake every day, you will never be able to run a business. I don't think that's possible. What is most critical is how you come out of it and ask yourself, how do you not repeat that same mistake? What are the systems, process? And that is why governance comes in, systems comes in, process comes in. How do you make sure you don't repeat the same mistake is the most important thing. And some of it is just not running away from the problem. You can't afford to run away from the problem. The best feedback that a founder of mine gave when I wanted to run away from the problem, one such problem, was he said, you can run away, fix the problem and then run away. That is the best feedback I got from him. And what he did in that process, he was coming across as being very nonchalant. But what he was trying to tell me, which I discovered later, is just give yourself time. In all of this, you want to immediately go back and change everything. That's not going to happen. It's practically and physically, and it's just not possible. But in a lot of these cases, if you give yourself more time, you will find the way out. You will know that, okay, these are the people I need to talk to fix this problem. This is a disclosure I need to do to make sure that people don't think I'm part of the problem. All of that will come. But you have to give yourself time. You cannot crucify yourself. And that, to me, is the definition of grace. You need to be gracious. And you have to start with yourself first.
Just adding two trivias here. When we were very early on in the company, we used to have two Wi-Fis active at a time. The password for one of the Wi-Fis was make mistakes. And the password for the second Wi-Fi was get shit done. I think get shit done still continues to be the password for one. Still there, yeah, okay. That is basically what she was saying. Get shit done. It's okay to make mistakes.
It's okay to make mistakes, yeah.
I'll change the mood a little bit here. I'll get back to the investing part. You invested in Scalar, and I'm sure you've invested in so many companies. What might make it again a little more real is if you think about Scalar's investment, what was that one aha moment which made you feel, yes, this is the company that we should invest in? By the way, if you're uncomfortable discussing Scalar with me, you can choose a different company as well.
No, why will I? We're very proud of our investment. So I think the aha moment was very interesting to do with design for me, because I'm a nerd that way. As in the aha moment for different. So we have a very collaborative decision-making exercise at Lightrock. It's not just one person driving it. There are 3-4 other people who are deeply involved in that process and who can fight back, question, argue, and say this is a bad idea, we're not going to go after this, etc. So that's kind of our philosophy, because the biggest mistake you can make in investing is hubris and thinking that your idea is the only best idea out there. It's a very intellectual process. There is and you don't do much after that. We're waiting for the investment to sort of show fruit, right? So for me personally, and I can talk about other people's view on my team as well, for me personally, the most exciting thing was the way Anshuman spoke about how the learning is happening inside the classroom, right? And this is before we started physical. So even the online piece. Learning is as much about habit creation as it is about your God-given talent. And there aren't very many founders who talk about learning as a product design idea. It sounds very, very simple, but it's not. We have met hundreds of founders in the space. And not just in education, but in whether it's in healthcare, it's in education, or in any other space, right? Most businesses succeed or fail off the back of the original design. How much room, even if the design changes, how much room has your original design given you to change your design? So design is very, very critical. Outside of design, the only time we have failed, in fact, the other way to flip the question is to ask, when have we failed? We have failed mostly because founders, because if the founder has failed. That's literally the only reason we have failed as a fund, right? Otherwise, what we have discovered is good ideas just need more time. So you keep stretching it somehow and you give it enough time, the good idea will come through. And a good idea by definition here, I mean good design principles, okay? Good design principles in Scalar's case, from a very business view, you can say, okay, you're solving for tech. Tech as an idea will never die. Does the team have the potential to go into other areas like business, business studies, etc.? Absolutely, yes. Are you doing it with a tech-enabled business model? We knew from day one that the answer is never going to be pure online, right? We didn't discuss much of it, but I think within 3 months of our investment, we had to sit down with Anshuman and Abhimanyu, where the first thing we said is we need to start campuses, right? So we knew, so the question was then, how are you embedding it? Like, how are you sort of making it really work? So those are like the critical pieces that were the aha moments for me. I think apart from that, fantastic founding team. And that is something the rest of the team also came in and validated. If I had to move to a different business, which also gives a similar aha moment, I would say, how are you structuring your gross margins? How is the business designed to make sure your gross margins are sensible? How does your P&L really look like? What sort of a balance sheet are you coming in with? How are you? Is that a very complex balance sheet? In that case, do you have the chops to do it? How do you use technology to run your balance sheet more effectively? So those are all very, very simple but very effective things that has helped us in a lot of other companies. We have a lot of companies which are in supply chain businesses. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But for Scale, it was very clearly product design, like the strength of the product, I think came through.
Thank you. Final question. It's day one for all of the students here on their 18-month long journey. I'm sure like you've seen multiple such careers in your stint. If you had to give them an advice of what they can do over the next 18 months, which will help them the most, what would that be?
If you already have a sense of what your strengths are, right? So I think 18 months where you can just focus on yourself is a wonderful luxury. I don't think any of us have it. I can tell you that. So I would say use all of that to understand what your strengths are and really double down on them. Okay. I don't think life is about having a 360-degree, I'm good at everything plan. I don't think that's how it works. I think the most successful founders that I have seen are people who are obsessed with an idea and who manage to convert that obsession into something that's very large, right? Obsession implies that you know yourself very well, you know what your strengths are, and then you're doing everything to make sure that your weaknesses don't sort of take you away from what you want to do, right? So I think just figuring that out is absolutely critical. A lot of people underestimate the importance of that. My only submission is you will not have time like this to focus only on yourself and to get to the right answer outside. Obviously, we want to see every single one of you building large businesses for the country. That's sort of our selfish agenda. But if I had to take away that agenda from the table, I would say figure out what really keeps you ticking and just double down on that. There is no such thing as I will be good at everything. That's a terrible idea. I don't think you can be good at everything. If you want to partner up with somebody who can help you complement, but just figure out what your strengths are and just double down on it and give yourself the time and the room to, become the person that you want to be. And the other thing I would suggest is exposure. Look, I am where I am because of exposure. I don't think I grew up knowing that this is what I wanted to do. This has been a series of like serendipity opening up, but serendipity, you have to allow serendipity to open you up to multiple opportunities, right? I think keeping an open mind and therefore like giving yourself as much exposure as possible, absolutely critical. That's the only way your brain learns. There is no other way. And like exposure to different things, different experiences, different people. Figure out what you like, figure out what you don't like. Take a call on it. It's okay. There is always the pressure of a job. I don't think that'll never go away. But that's okay. But use the time to understand what you want to achieve, or at least what your strengths are. Okay, you don't need to know today that this is the business I want to build. But just obsessively following that stream of thought will compound. And that compounding is where the magic lies. It's not in filling up a CV, if you ask me.
Awesome. Thank you, Divya. We'll open the floor for some questions in case there are some of you who want to directly. Okay, there are already a lot of questions. Maybe you can go first.
So, how would you view what our investors see in founder before we did on kind of funding? Is it just a booming business or industry like AI, or they bet on founder itself? So, business over investor or investor over?
Yeah. So I think in India, the quality of the founder is supreme. Okay. India is a very tough place to run a business. You need to manage many things. Everything from government to your employees to, it's generally a highly regulated environment for most businesses. Okay. And you can't just go to a court and say, I'll get something enforced. Right. And I'm just wearing my pure investor hat here. So what you need to know is that you can trust the founder. Okay. So I would say founder over business area is absolutely critical. And we have invested in sectors that are not cool. That's kind of where I'm coming from, right? Like today, education is not, like pure education, K-12 education is not a cool place to invest. But will we put in money? Absolutely, yes. Right? Because we see the potential behind it over a 10-year period, right? So I would say founder of a business. The thing though is, if you know already which is the domain that you want to go after, you should anyway go ahead and experiment. If you don't know, a good question that you can ask yourself as a founder is, where do I want to play? Which space do I want to play? The two spaces in India which have consistently made money for investors. I'm talking about private investors, not public market investing. I know very little about it, so I'm not going to speak to it very much. But in private market investing, the two spaces where I know so many funds which have actually made money, and making money in private market investing is very hard in India, by the way. No matter what the news articles say, most people haven't made money in that space, even the ones who are showing up for the interviews. Okay, the two spaces are consumers, consumer businesses, financial services. Consistently, funds have made money, backing investors who have explored a bunch of new ideas there, even if it's a very difficult idea like microfinance, right? So those are like, it's useful to keep the domain in mind. And obviously, if you're running a SaaS business, then yes, that is the other domain where we have seen some very big players coming. The thing is, at any given point in time, there will be 3 or 4 of such domains. It's your call what problem you want to solve. I would flip the question and ask yourself, what is the problem you want to solve? Okay? Because this is going to be an extremely intensive process. You need to make sure that you're fully in. And if it's not an area that particularly tickles you, you will not be fully in. Right? So the question to ask yourself is, what is the problem you want to solve? And therefore, what is the domain? You can be super opportunistic and say, I don't care about a particular problem. Let me dabble it across a particular set of domains. Today, those domains are financial services, SaaS, whether you call it SaaS or AI, whatever it is, right? AI is a general purpose technology. It's going to come in everything. So it's very hard to say what is a pure AI business. People have different definitions of it. It's very confusing. Okay. But yeah.
One bad experience if investor led the backstab. That kind of
Not really. Most of private market investing, you lose money in most companies. At least VC, venture capital. Let me define here. Okay. So there are many kinds of money, many different types of return models that private investors go after. Okay. The one that sort of my fund belongs to today is called venture capital. And in venture capital, it is a power law that reigns supreme. Okay. Which is very hard to figure out in India. Because in India, power law has not always worked. In the sense, there aren't 100x. So the logic behind venture capital is you will fail in 90% of your businesses. Your 10% will more than just return your fund. Okay, so it's a disproportionate curve. It's not a normal curve. So, but if you look at more PE businesses, not public. It's just before public. So it's in between, right? So in between the stage, the PE capital, those are, they wouldn't necessarily, they'll be happy with a 3x to 5x sort of a return on their investment. And there you will have many more successful companies within your portfolio. But you can't get into investing without realizing that you will lose money. I think, although the golden rule is don't lose any money, because losing money automatically impacts your ability to raise money in the future. Having said that, as an investor, if you don't have the appetite for losing money, you should not get into it.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the pitch, which was like very close to you, and like what hit the sport and like the best pitch you came up with?
Okay. I've spoken enough about Scaler, so maybe I'll try a different company. Otherwise, I feel like I'm far too biased. in the portfolio, yeah, best pitch. Yeah. But leaving that aside, let me look at a different business, right? Just to keep things a little bit more I'm sure everyone is not interested in education the way I am, so I can't be so selfish. I think a very, very interesting pitch is one of our healthcare companies, which is trying to build an operating system there, right? And I think their pitch was that, let me explain what the business is doing today, and then I will tell you what excited us about the pitch. I think what the business is doing today is it has got the largest number of employers of the country, benevolent employers of the country on its platform, okay? And what it is trying to do is create a end-to-end health tech platform for all of the employees in that employers employed by that particular company, right? So all of these benevolent employers. It is the largest of its kind, and it is, as of now, at least doing the best in that space. What excited us about the pitch was the deep technical knowledge that the founder came with. He knew that industry inside out. He knew which are the, I would say, which are the top 50 employers of the country who will continue to be involved in that kind of an idea. So you have to know the technical chops. This is not a professional role. You need to know. So that was very exciting for us. The second thing was that if you have to fundamentally reimagine healthcare in India, you have to go beyond hospitals. So the value of the idea. What is the design of the idea? Is the design of the idea scalable? If you're thinking only hospitals, you'll not be able to run more than 100 hospitals. Like Apollo has less than 200 hospitals in the country. That is how underserved we are as a market. Right? So you have to think, if I'm building a platform, how do I go about it? How is it completely tech focused from the beginning? And then how do I bring in elements of monetization after that? So I would say, I think the tech piece, the founder's technical knowledge himself in terms of what he understood about the healthcare space. And the third piece, of course, is that he had already established a very good revenue run rate. Always helps to know that the business is making money. That is the other piece that really hit this.
We'll take 2 more questions. By the way, if you want to use the mic, you can. Okay. We'll take one question from you, and then there's one more question after that, which we'll take.
Sure.
So please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ashish, and I'm a founder myself of an edtech company. So it's been 5 years me running this company, and the main focus is bringing in STEM education to the school kids, majorly working in 3rd to 8th graders. So one of the way we do is we have our own range of educational, self-buildable educational toys, and also we work with premium schools mostly to teach them innovation, design thinking, and robotics and technology as a core, right? But that being said, we got the idea of working in the segment because of us teaching at a government school during our engineering days, and we saw the spark of how kids get excited because of learning technology. So because of that lines, we still dedicate a lot of our energy to train government school kids and a lot of underprivileged kids as such through our CSR programs. So looking at the market here, because of our private profitable part where we work with premium schools where fees is 2 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs or more, also with the educational toys range, the parents are very desperate. Parents and schools also they want the 3rd standard child to just start coding AI, Python and all that. That's a very small segment. Whereas on the bottom line, the schools are not interested in technology. They're just fine with math, science and all that. On the other hand, parents are just sending the kids for the school just because, maybe free meals is there or whatever the reason is, right? So the only way we found a way to solve this problem is through government funds and CSRs. So I see a big gap here, and I'm not able to figure out how do we bring technology or new age concepts into the bottom line, which is a major part of the K-12 segment or where the major kids are there. How do we solve that problem according to you?
Very hard problem to solve. So I think the way I would put it is, if you are truly obsessed with this problem, you will need to give yourself another 10 years. I think the people keep talking about the number of people. When people try to define addressable market, they only refer to the volume of people in India, and they assume discretionary income, that the income will follow K-12 segment. Challenge with K-12 segment is long feedback loops. You have to invest consistently in that idea for a 15-year period before the parent sees. And then the parent will see the compounding happen very quickly. Like if you learn English through phonetics, parent will immediately see that the child is becoming comfortable learning English, because phonetics is the best way to learn English, right? Especially for children, because they are living in the world of symbols. They're associating symbols with ideas, with words, and they pick up very quickly, and their brain is firing like crazy at their age. So there are very specific ideas. You are absolutely right. There is a huge market failure across the board, especially in the affordable segment and the government schools. That market failure is not easy to solve because of regulatory challenges as well, right? Which prevent you from being able to scale much faster because your pricing is completely skewed because of that. Or you have to go for a different payer, like the CSR funds here, right? I would say you need at least 10 years, because you need to see parents who are currently in the lower income segment, and I would call that lower income segment anywhere less than 5 to 7 lakh per year. That itself is not technically lower income. It is much lower than that. But even if we take that as the segment, they need to be able to spend more of their wallet share towards education. It's not that they don't want to. Today they can't. Because today one healthcare scare in the family brings them below the poverty line. That is how fragile their lives are, right? And when the consumer's life is so fragile, as you rightly said, that consumer cannot be your stable consumer. You have to look to other people who become the payer, and the consumer just becomes the user. And that is the complication. I think it's a hard problem to solve. It's not unachievable. And in that space, I think we will always need a combination of for-profit and not-for-profit to work together to get to the right answer. And that's okay. Everything doesn't have to be solved only through, especially educational market failure is a tricky one. Education and healthcare as well, for example, right? So I think those are spaces where it's perfectly okay to say, I'm going to come up with a completely new model. But you will have to wait for the payer, the classic parent. If you want the parent as a payer, you have to wait. I don't think there is any other easy answer.
In that way, the next almost.
I think in K-12, what is more important is distribution more than product. So if you can try and build a distribution play, even if it's a traditional distribution play, it's hugely powerful because it fundamentally reduces your CAC and you can throw multiple products into the pipe. Pipes become very, very powerful. That is why India's traditional investors always prefer pipes over platforms because pipes are very powerful. They're here to stay. We have a lot of NBFC companies in our portfolio who are not particularly tech-enabled, as in they have a little bit of tech. But they make very comfortable profits because pipes are always very powerful. Your strong sales team, always a very useful muscle to have internally.
We'll take the last question.
My question is like, as a fresher or someone with, let's say, internship experience, can they join VC? And if not, like what skills should I focus on so that I stand a chance to learn?
I think internship, see the VC industry, the challenge is that these are all very small teams. Okay. So as it is, everybody's trying to prove their value within that team because the team structure itself is very small. Like we have only some 25 people, right? And because what you discover is that in a sense, we represent only a small thin layer. All the work is happening through our founding companies, right? So that is kind of where a lot of, if you had to define team, that is where a larger team is sitting, inside our portfolio companies, right? I think the way to think about, if you want to build a career in investing, if I could flip the question, VC is not the only route. There are multiple types of capital. There is equity, there is debt. There are public markets, there's private market. Public market investing in India is very sophisticated. We have some of the best and the most vibrant public markets in the world, right? So the most important thing is how do you quickly join that journey? So if you have the luxury of being able to experiment with some of your own money in public markets, it's not a bad way to start. Even just tracking some of your favorite companies, being on those investor calls, the earning calls that happen on a quarterly basis will help you learn a lot. So the best way to sort of get your hands dirty in investing is to try it out. If that flexibility is not available to you, and that's also perfectly okay, try and see what are the different types of capital. Capital is a spectrum. So try and see where else can you intern. Can you intern at a large bank, like the investment banks? That's a good way to learn. The large PE firms, they are typically larger machines because they also do very active portfolio management. So there are all of those categories that are possible. And if ultimately you say that, look, what excites me is focusing on very early stage companies, you can always move into VC later. But VC itself is a very low employee to capital ratio business. It's core to their design model. That's how everybody in that space also makes their money. So the incentive mechanism is, misaligned from having too many people, if I'm super blunt. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But if you want exposure to capital, there are multiple avenues. And typically the two cities in India which do most of this is Mumbai and Bangalore. So you are in the right place to start with if you want to experiment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Divya, for joining us and sharing your views. We hope to have you in the campus multiple times.
No, absolutely. I'm very excited. I'm really looking forward to, hearing all of your pitches, whatever your aspirations are. And thank you so much for having me here. It is always a privilege to meet all of you. You are the future of this country. So very, very excited to see what you will build over a period of time. Thank you.